Good evening, everybody. This is Monica Bessam, and I am doing my presentation for my teaching lesson plan. And my idea came to me from the New Mexico Journey book that was lent to me by a friend of mine. He used it at Volcano Vista, I believe. And so in chapter 5, I found a great little thing that really piqued my interest. It's talking about the Jewish settlers. I don't know if any of you guys have access to this book, but it's a wonderful book, and I was very happy to see that this history was in a book because my family's from northern New Mexico, and this has always been a fascinating topic in our family. And so I was happy to do additional research on this, and I sat in lectures and different things to gain more knowledge about it. Let me switch over to a PowerPoint now. Let's see if we can get it going. Sorry, I have a toddler at home, so this is going to be difficult. Okay. So some of the terminology, I made sure to put definitions for people so that there's questions. Diaspora is the dispersion of the Jewish people beyond Israel. And so a lot of times you'll hear about diaspora maps for different ethnicities, but specifically it oftentimes relates to the Jewish people. Spain was a melting pot for many years. There were Catholics, Muslims, Christians, Moors, and Jews living in harmony. Moors were a sect of Muslims. And in 1492, when Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand decided to start the Inquisition and become a one religion nation country, they started to ask that all the Jewish people either convert to Catholicism or leave the country. Also, as I was doing my research, one of the last public noted burning of Jews in Spain was 1695. I don't know if that's when the Inquisition and the torture ended, or if that's just the last noted burning of Jews. So I know a lot of times people get genetic DNA testing and they get in New Mexico done and they get a indicator or a marker that doesn't say Spanish, but they say Iberian. And this just gives you an idea of what the Iberian Peninsula looks like. Okay, so the hidden Jews in New Mexico go by a couple of different names. So there's people called conversos, which were those that were forced into conversion, and the conversos are often thought to either have agreed with the government change to take on this new religion and they embraced it, or they only did it to appease the government in order to be able to remain in their homeland and in their country. There is record that when Don Juan de Oñate left Spain and traveled with the conquistadors, that they become known as crypto Jews at that point, later on, they come with these conquistadors. There is also some fascinating theories when it comes to Christopher Columbus. And Neto Malia, who is a professor of Asian religion and studies at UNM, has a wonderful idea that him and other historians have looked over the will of Christopher Columbus, and they believe that there's some indicators in his will that lean him towards being Jewish himself. So also the crypto Jews are people that would practice their faith in secrecy. So a lot of people now in New Mexico start to realize that there's this meshing of the Jewish culture and the Hispanic New Mexican culture. And they believe it's because they came up with the conquistadors. There's lots of priests, there's lots of Catholicism going on, but there's also, I look back on some history and some stories I've heard that there is some melding of this culture and of this race into the northern New Mexico Hispanic families. And I love some of the stories that Ned Amalia talks about. Ned Amalia talks about there's a saying in New Mexico that that's the pig that ate my kid brother. And he said the reason that that was associated with the crypto Jews, like a saying, was to keep the kids from wanting to eat pork. Like they never would butcher a pig, but they would keep a pig because that was the right thing for what a good Catholic family farm would have. Also, there is another crypto Jew here in New Mexico who recently told her story on a PBS sit down. and she was talking about how when she was little, she would actually practice Shabbat. She would light candles with her grandmother, and her grandmother would speak in Spanish and say these prayers to herself, and the grandmother would say, "We don't talk about this. We don't do anything about this." This same woman said that there was something called the family priest. And I have heard this many times. There are many families in northern New Mexico that there is a priest in the family, and they are the only people that would do any kind of rituals as far as burials or marriages or certain things like that. Netamalia also points to this idea that there are menorah-like structures in a lot of Hispanic homes, and that there are many features in graveyards in northern New Mexico. I believe there's some in Nambe, Abiquiu, Las Vegas, and they said that they were very old headstones, and the indicator was there was vines, and the vine would have 12 leaves. Now, the 12 leaves would represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And those would be Abraham's sons. If anybody knows the childhood song, Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham. He had 12 sons. That's the 12 tribes of Israel. And so, these were some indicators that they realized. Now, historically, what we know in New Mexico was that the only Jewish settlers came through Ellis Island, and that's what many people always believed in the 1800s, that they traveled from wagon train to the old Santa Fe Trail. And that's why you'll look in the oldest history. This idea has come up probably since the 90s, is when all of this kind of became revealed. And so prior to that, you would see names like Garden Schwartz. If anybody knows Garden Schwartz Sports, it was a big Albuquerque, like a Dick's Sporting Goods, but a locally owned one. And the Garden Schwartz family is one of the original names from that era. There are some other names, and I think Levin might be one. There was um, actually a Jewish man who lived on the Navajo reservation, and he was a trader, and he used to orchestrate many land deals, but he was part of that later coming. Now, the reason this is so important is because in 1492, when they started to expel the Jews and the conquistadors start to come, we're starting to see that in the 1600s, there's possibly these records of people coming into New Mexico by way of South America, Mexico, and such. And so I think that diaspora, sorry, I can't ever say this, diaspora maps are often thought to never include the South American, North American area, but there are Jewish populations there. Now, this brings up the question for many people that Judaism is strictly a religion. Well, there are now genetic markers that indicate if you are Jewish, and we will get to that there in a minute. So you don't think that I'm just going on a religious tyrant. The indicators would not show up if you were a converted Jew. These would be families that you have to remember in the Jewish population, they continue to marry and only marry into their kind, so the genetic marker would be there. So this is a very interesting article I found, and this is kind of what started my family on the path that we had always heard about. I remember as a kid, I'm almost 40, and my mom would always say that families ending in E-Z, Chavez was her family name, were Sephardic Jews. And so to understand, I found this wonderful article, and it says to understand the meaning of the suffix EZ and ES of the last name requires a look back into the history of Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, which we were talking about earlier. So Iberia is shepherd, and shepherd or sefer is where Sephardic comes from. And this means the people of the Holy Book. There are two major types today, and one is Ashkenazi, meaning German or Slavic speaking, and the other is Sephardic Jews or Spanish speaking. I do believe in the genetic indicators. I had an aunt that had a DNA test done, and hers said Ashkenazi, which is the more orthodox of the Jewish population, even though this says German or Slavic speaking. But I don't know if Sephardic has its own DNA indicator. And so this goes on to say that the suffix EZ means Eres Zion, or from Zion. And so there is another article I have as well. This goes on to say that the EZ was an indicator of a surname that was taken over for for people that had converted so they could be hidden. But they kind of, for their sponsors, they took on these last names. So some of the names that appear are Lopez, Gomez, Dominguez, Rodriguez, Sanchez, Ramirez, Garcia, Hurtado, Varela, or Varela. And then there's many other names. So this is a wonderful article if anybody wants to take it down. It's The Secret Jews of the Southwest by Frances Hernandez. And she did a lot of great work on it. There's a lot of, it's like 44 pages of reading, and it's absolutely wonderful. So one of my favorite people in the world that found out that he was actually a crypto Jew is Father Bill Sanchez, and he was the priest when I was a kid in Bernalillo. I was not part of the Catholic Church, but he actually did my great grandmother's funeral service, and I always remember him. He was a very young priest then. And he's oftentimes, if you look at Crypto Jew, any information, he is one of the foremost backers of people getting their DNA testing and finding out more about their history and fully embracing it. And he still, I believe, acts as a priest here in Albuquerque. He went from Bernalillo to Belen, and so he has a project called the Santa Fe DNA Project that tests Hispanics in New Mexico for their Jewish DNA signatures. And in 2006, it says that there was 130 people that had been tested, and 30% came back linked to the Cohenim genetic line. And so he also establishes that his Jewish DNA does not interfere with his religious beliefs. It's just very interesting. And so there's a lot of pictures of him blowing the shofar, which is the ram's horn, if you ever look him up. But he's a fascinating guy and very sweet. So this is my mother's DNA that she did, I believe it was 3 years ago. And if you look here, it maps out North America and South America as her predominant places and origins of where her DNA ended. These were the originators, I believe. And so you see, I wrote them over here because they were grainy. The European Jewish is 30%, and that's from Western and Central Europe. Now, Native American, 27%, and that's New Mexican Native American. The Iberian Peninsula is 11%, and Europe South is 11%, and Great Britain is 8%.